take a lot of photos of them.
Yeah.
There's some techniques I might apply in
Sure.
my own hobbies.
Sure. Hey, welcome. We're going to get started pretty soon. It is that time, believe it or not. And we have a cavernous room here to contain the throngs that have showed up to participate in the working group today. Yes, you count as a throng personally, Mr. Resnick.
I think the big personalities still fill
Yes.
the room.
Yeah, yeah, it's the size of the personalities, not the body count itself. So, yeah, should we kick it off? I see no reason why not. Other people may filter in as we go, but thank you so much for coming to MODPOD. We're going to talk about moderation, procedures, processes, and so on here today. And I don't know if we're going to use the whole 2 hours. Depends on how argumentative the people here are. Like, you know, we haven't got a lot of prepared material, but we have a lot of time available for discussion.
I can help being argumentative if you like.
Barry, you are welcome to keep us here until after 11:30. I'm sure none of us have anything better to do. Please do note the following things well. It is Wednesday morning, so presumably you've had plenty of opportunities to note all of this before now. But note really well, and this actually is a bit closer to the topic we're going to be discussing today. This is a place for professional collaboration and networking, and we do strive to maintain an environment in which people of different backgrounds and identities are treated with dignity, decency, and respect. So here, of all places, we're going to be kind of super serious about making sure that's the case. Finally, please do log in. We want to make sure we've got a good record of who everybody is that is here. I'm looking at that thing. I see 13, 15 participants listed now. Make sure, please, that you are using this tooling and logging into this. We want to make sure we know who's party to the discussions. And finally, if you need any assistance navigating this labyrinthine meeting, there are resources available to help you understand IETF 122 in Bangkok. But with that, this is our agenda. We are welcome to take bashes at this time. If anybody thinks that the discussion we intend to have here of draft IETF MODPOD group processes could be augmented by discussion of something else, we might be able to find some room for that at the tail end of this. Is anybody here interested in bashing this agenda? Okay. Is anybody here feel like taking some notes for us? Really great if somebody here, you know, I see a number of people shaking their heads defiantly in response to this question, as they usually do. My excuse is usually actually I just bring an iPad, so that doesn't even have a keyboard. So I'm like, how could I take notes? Unfortunately, I do have a keyboard now, but I can't take notes. So anybody, please, if someone here is willing to take notes. Oh, Bron did. Thank you, Bron. Wonderful. Okay, and people, please do follow the chat. And if there are things in the chat that we are not able to see as we are up here chairing, people that need things to come up to the mic, please do let us know. But with that, if there's no further ado, Lars, would you care to come up and join us? Now, we're going to try this thing where we're going to give you the clicker, and I'm going to give control to the clicker. But first, I guess I should share the proper slide deck.
So cutting the pink cross isn't where the microphone is, so
Yeah.
let's see how this works. Good morning.
All right, let's see. So does slide clicker control work there? Okay, look at that.
It works. And I'm going to go closer to the mic. This is one of the few meetings where there's way more people at the tables in front than in the back, which is kind of weird. It also kind of looking down looks like a nice GIB reunion, but that's also expected. Right, so I have a few slides that try to summarize the 3 revisions we made to this doc, which is the one working group document after it got adopted at the last meeting. Elliot is a co-author. I don't think he's remotely present. If he is, Elliot, please jump in at any time if I'm saying something wrong or you want to add something.
I don't see it.
I can't see who's remote. Okay. And you already had the URL. So we work on GitHub, and if you, so we try to capture issues that are brought up on the mailing list, obviously. it's easier if you convert them into GitHub issues yourself, because then they're there and we don't have to like make sure that we don't miss them. And it makes it so if you're familiar with GitHub and you like to use it, we like to use it too. Just use GitHub and maybe then send an email to the mailing list saying I opened this issue. Otherwise, we will do it for you. We did 3 revisions. I'm going to try and summarize the current content of the document, specifically the changes we made since adoption, and sort of the overall goal is to figure out if we're largely on the right track with what's in the document. And you know, I'm not surprised to hear that I think we are, but I want to hear if you think we are. And my proposal would be that I run through these few slides. Happy to take maybe clarification questions during, and we have the discussion after. But if you feel like something triggers you to want to discuss, that's okay too. We have plenty of time, but at some point maybe we'll like shift the discussion to the end. Right, so the first change we made, there was a pretty big rationale in the individual draft that was then adopted by the working group. And we've kind of felt it served its purpose, i.e. it led to a working group adoption by motivating the problem. So we moved that to an appendix for now. We're discussing between the editors whether at some point we might need to cut it entirely or not, right? So if somebody has feelings about this, let us know, but it's now sort of way at the back. We added a section, mostly Elliot did, on the goals for moderation. And I think these bullets are actually taken from the document, but it's basically to apply consistent, fair, and timely moderation of communication across all of the IETF channels, specifically without regards to some current or former position that somebody might have held. So ISG doesn't get a free pass, is basically what this means to say, or leadership doesn't get a free pass. Disagreements about moderation actions are handled through appeals. I think this is a principle that sort of works pretty well for the moderation that we have at the moment, and we're going to carry that forward. And with sort of striving to balance transparency towards the community while keeping sort of the privacy of individuals involved in balance. And also in the past, we've seen that public discussion of moderation actions caused quite a bit of disruption in the community, and we want to sort of minimize that occurring in the future. We want to allow for moderators to freely reconsider their decisions, right? Because as you'll find out later, we have like this dual approach where there's a moderation team, but there's also still the working group chairs, and they work together. And in the interest of sort of timely action, actions might be taken before like these two parties have maybe fully reached consensus. And so there needs to be a way to walk back decisions easily, and we want to allow for that. And we want to give the team the broadest latitude to like define tools that they find valuable to address this sort of pretty broad range of participation channels that we have. We are going to create a moderator team for the IETF. It is no less than 5 people. Stephen Farrell sent an email earlier saying he doesn't believe 5 people can moderate all of the IETF. I agree. It says at least 5 people, and the ISG that appoints these people can appoint more if it turns out that more are needed. But I think we wanted to make sure that there's like a lower bar to how many people are on the team, so it can't easily be captured like by 2 people that don't like anybody and moderate everybody. And we want to have a certain diversity in the team, and so we want to have a certain number of individuals serving, both for diversity of perspectives, but also like geographic coverage and time zone coverage and so on. We landed on not allowing anybody to serve as a moderator who is on a body that the NomCom appoints positions at, right? So that includes everybody on that body, not just the ones that the NomCom appoints, and no LLC staff or contractors. And the ISG is not otherwise involved in the moderation, but they can be asked by the team to consult, and specifically if there's a disagreement between working group chairs and the moderators, the draft says that the AD, and by extension the ISG, will sort of get involved in the discussion in order to resolve that conflict. I have more on this later. The scope, again, this is from the document. It's the team's responsible for establishing the processes, the detailed processes. This document sets the policy, but doesn't specify detailed processes. To address the moderation needs for all of the IETF fora, both present and in the future, and it lists like which ones they are currently. And the moderators are authorized to moderate all non-working group fora by themselves, basically, because there really, by definition, isn't anybody else that's tasked with that. And also the ones, the channels where we have bespoke moderation at the moment, which is the last call list, the IETF discussion list, and so on. For working groups and other sort of groups, the draft is a little bit wishy-washy on some of the details. I think this is an area where we need to spend some time. So at the moment it says the responsibility for moderation remains with the group chairs. The moderators are available for consultation and they can reach out to the group chairs if they notice something that should be moderated. But it also says that the group participants may flag behavior to the moderators and the chairs, and the moderators must then consult with the chairs, and the chairs can flag things to the moderators if action is needed. And then it says the moderators may take action in the group, which basically goes a little bit against the first bullet, and which said that the responsibility remains with the chairs. The moderators may also take action if it's timely, but then they must inform the group chairs and the AD. And if there's a disagreement about the chairs and moderators, they need to take up with the next level. So I think the basic idea that we have this collaboration between the moderator team and the chairs is a good one. And I haven't discussed this with Elliot, but my sort of personal proposal for revamping this a little bit is that we allow either the chairs or the moderator team to take action if one of those parties believes that action is needed. And they can then sync up. And if they agree on the action, it's fine. If they disagree, we start this discussion resolution process with the AD and ISG in the loop, and a decision might need to be walked back if it was taken prematurely. John?
I was just going to ask if Barry had a clarifying question or comment.
Yeah, sorry, I can't see the queue here.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's right at the top of the.
Okay, okay. I just didn't know.
This is Barry Leba. It was on the previous bit, the no members of bodies to which the NOMCOM appoints someone.
Yep.
The trust seems a little odd to be in that list, and I just wonder if there's any thought about eliminating the trust from that set. And there's Sean jumping up to tell me I'm full of it. So, and John also. So, I'll leave it at that.
Hi, Sean Turner. I guess I'm wearing the LLC hat at this point, or some of it, because I sit on the board. Well, I think it is odd to be up there. There are instances in which the LLC and its bodies, things have been.
I didn't say LLC. I said trust.
Oh, trust. Sorry.
I have a slide about the LLC later because we have.
Yeah, I have a clarifying question about this slide, which is sort of
this one, or
this moderator team slide. Yeah, just the bigger the team, the harder it is to get people to do stuff consistently. And so, you know, like there's it's all the way from one person who presumably is consistent with herself to 100 people where it's sort of random. And I'm wondering, has that issue of how we ensure that different people in different time zones and different cultures do stuff consistently come up? I presume so. I'm surprised it's not here.
So we do want consistent moderation. I think that is definitely mentioned in the draft. I would actually
about, you know, team size makes it harder.
Do you think that the draft could define a policy that would make that easier, or is that something that we should leave to the team to figure out how to do?
I don't think we can write down a rule for, or other than to note that it's important that the team figure out how to be consistent.
Okay, I agree.
Right, this is Barry. I think asking the team to come to consensus on how they do things is reasonable and sufficient.
Yeah, I believe, and Chris Box is in the room to correct me, I believe the current moderators for the IETF list, basically everybody who is like awake and online is getting together and basically forms a consensus group. And so that consensus group can shift obviously with time zones and with vacations and what have you. But I hope that there would always be sort of a sufficient number of people that you get a sufficient diversity of perspectives when something needs to be decided. Let's Chris jump in here.
Yeah, yeah, that's correct. Okay, so it's dependent on who's awake.
Just to David Skenazy, to respond to that, and please tell me if you want me to take this to the discussion after. I think it's totally possible to have consistent application of rules in a large team. Example we have is the ISG discuss criteria. All the ISG members follow those rules. Those aren't documented in RC. They're a doc conceptually that the ISG maintains. You could reuse that model here. It would totally work. I think we could also say that we want to put some in the draft, but whether or not we do, we can have something be consistent. This is not that hard.
Right. One quick reaction to something that was said earlier about the trust, which I think I never responded to. So I think we made this rule because it's easy to express, right? You could similarly say, well, maybe what about the ISOC board, right? The trust also appoints people, the NOMCOM also appoints people there. They're in the appeals chain, so it's a little bit different. But yeah, we can give the trust a carve out, and we can maybe give other bodies to which the NOMCOM appoints carve outs. But then it gets complicated, and you know, in reality, there's like 5 people on the trust, and how many people does that really affect materially? So that's why it's the way it's written.
The NOMCOM does not appoint to the ISOC board, the IAB does.
I'm sorry. All right, so ISOC board people get in line. Sorry, go ahead.
So Ted Lemon, 2 things. One, regarding appointments, I think there's a clear reason to do that, which is that people are a little concerned. There have been concerns expressed about conflict of interest, and so having the sort of keeping them separate seems really important. So thank you for that. The thing about consistency, I'm a little afraid that if we are too optimistic about consistency, we may actually shut out useful controversy in the moderation team about precisely what the moderation should be. So I don't think we should get too detailed about exactly how. I mean, obviously we want consistency ideally, but there should be the room for arguments, or else, you know, we can wind up sort of getting into a groupthink situation and not moderating in cases where we should, or moderating in cases where we shouldn't. So we should leave that open.
Thanks.
Q Meisel, on the topic of consistency as well, I'm in favor of placing a requirement on the moderation team to maintain some shared document. This need not be an RFC, this is just like a Google Doc or whatever that is a living document of how the moderation team wants to moderate. This has to exist. There are no more requirements about what's in it, but we just say you have to have this rule set that you decide on.
Yeah, that's how the current IETF discussion team, moderation team works, and I think that's what we would want for this team too. And I think the draft even says that. I just can't remember if it does. All right, since the queue is drained, let me fast forward to where we were. Right, so this is, I talked about like that there's some work needed here, and I have a proposal for what I think should happen. So I'll take it up with Elliot if anybody else like has a suggestion how we get the moderators and the chairs working together effectively so that timely moderation can happen. And if something needs to be walked back, it can. That would be helpful. Right, the moderators define the process. So I think this directly follows what Q just said, right? Within the policies defined by this internet draft and eventually RFC, right? The idea is that the moderators define the detailed processes, including the types of moderation actions that they are giving themselves as tools, right? The moderators are responsible to the ISG. By the way, this is a change that we made. Like the original draft was modeled after the IETF discussion list team, which reports to the chair of the IETF. This now has it reporting to the ISG and not the chair. So they're responsible. They're appointed by the ISG and not just one person on the ISG. And all moderation actions taken must be reported to the ISG. This might actually be too noisy, I think, because oftentimes the moderators just send a "Hey, would you cool it?" email. which is a moderation action. And I don't know if the ISG really wants to hear every time this happens. But we can also, maybe we can make this a little bit more flexible, and the ISG can decide which level of information they want to receive from the moderator team. There is a carve out here where all moderation actions that are in effect for more than 2 weeks must be reported to the ISG and to the forum, if it's one forum. And if it's multiple fora where a moderation action applies, it must be sort of announced to the community in some form that the ISG gets to decide. And it could also be the moderator team that decides. It doesn't need to be the ISG. That's just the text we wrote.
You've got some people in queue.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Hi, Jean-François. Have you had any estimation about the excess workload that this may represent for all the parties involved?
For the participants, or?
No, for the moderators, for ISG, for the ADs, for the chairs, everyone who's going to be involved in the process that you've been describing. Has there been any evaluation about how much extra work on top of what they already have this could represent?
So for the moderators, I expect it will take a chunk of time each week, and maybe the person again from the discussion list moderation team can tell us what current time commitment is that you are signed up for. I expect the area directors and ISG to get involved reasonably rarely, because the typical case is that there should be agreement between the chairs and the moderators when an action is taken. And that means the ISG and the AD isn't even in the loop, right? If there's agreement at that level, there's no further escalation up. The escalation up only happens if the chairs and the moderators disagree about an action that was taken. And I don't think that will happen very frequently. So hopefully we're not sort of creating a new hotbed of work for the ISG here.
I also have another kind of maybe strange question. Do we have an RFC defining the term fair?
We do have in terms of flow fairness, but not in terms of like participation fairness.
I'm a bit concerned about that term because it's going to be interpreted in different ways by different people, and I don't know exactly how is that going to be balancing.
So Lisa points out we do have the IETF code of conduct, which I think defines.
Okay. So that will be a reference for that. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Harold, I guess I can only see who's
Harold.
currently up.
Yes, Harold, please.
So Harald Østrand, former IETF chair. So to clarify, the reason why the moderators report to the chair was that when we invented the moderators, the rest of the ISG said, no, that's your problem. So I'm all happy to have them report to the ISG because the chair shouldn't have to do everything. And moderation actions reporting, I think we should put in some words saying something like at least monthly or something to get people thinking in the mode of, okay, it's possible to figure out what a moderation team did, but nobody's going to notice instantly.
Okay, so you want an additional reporting towards the community on sort of an aggregate.
No, I'm saying that the moderation team should keep note on what they're doing, and every month or so they should send it to ISG so the ISG knows.
Oh, so to the ISG, not that. So currently the ISG should know what happens in a month because they get like instant emails when something happens.
Yeah, and I think that's too much busy work.
Okay, so you think a monthly report to the entire ISG, and okay, fair point.
Just don't make too much noise.
Okay.
This is Pete. That sounds very echoey. Just to Harold's point, since he brought it up, if the moderation team and or the chairs and probably collectively have some sort of live log of moderation things where it's not individual reports, it's just a log, then the IASG can keep up with it or not as they see fit. And that seems like a much saner way to do it. They should be logging all of the actions that are being taken. And that way things can be tracked. For working groups, the AD in charge of that working group should be monitoring that. And if that AD wants a report every so often, that's fine too. Or whoever wants notices, that seems like more of a tooling thing. But the log, I think, is the key for that. One on the previous slide that popped into my head, the moderators may moderate working group lists when necessary. And that necessary is a big funky hole to me. I think what gets us out of moderators and chairs arm wrestling is moderators may take action if chairs are not available to. That is, if a moderator says, holy crap, that's awful, and can drop a quick email to the chair and say, you better take care of this, and in a half hour or an hour or whatever is decided is unavailable, that chair doesn't come back and do something, fine. But what we don't want to have happen, I don't think, is have chairs present doing what they think is appropriate for their list and moderators overriding that with action on the list immediately. That should take going to the AD and saying, yo, I don't think this chair is dealing with this appropriately.
I generally agree. However, there is the issue of consistency where I think we do want as an organization to have consistent moderation. And if chairs in a particular working group have a much higher bar for what they consider worthy of moderation than the moderator team, I think we want the moderator team standards to apply.
I agree with that principle. Right. The question is the in the moment, right? That I want those moderators to say, you know, folks, that's not the way to moderate this list, and you need to get on, you know, moderating it better, and go to the AD and say, you got to manage your chairs. They're not moderating this list appropriately. What I think is the bad plan is that in the moment wrestling match between the, you know, a chair that's not moderating the way the moderation team has prescribed is the more appropriate way to do so. That I think is inviting more conflict.
So I thought about your proposal, right, which is basically delay a moderation action until it gets discussed in this resolution, which is a one approach, right? And it has an upside that you don't have something that you then need to walk back later on. But I can also, like, I have this other scenario in mind where timely action is needed and we don't want to wait for this discussion to happen. And I want to at least allow that with the option of then basically saying, we got it wrong, we're very sorry, we're apologizing to the person that was moderated, we're like lifting whatever we did. Because otherwise things spiral out of control quickly when they do. And it's very important that something timely is done, even if it's maybe overstepping or needs to be fine-tuned afterwards. And so these are the two.
Let's take more of this to the list.
Yeah, well, we've got a big queue here, so let's
getting down into details. The other one I wanted to ask about was on the next slide. Keep
it quick, Pete. We got a long queue.
I will be very quick. All things must be reported to the forum if they last longer than 14 days. I can imagine that if I'm one of those people who has a hard time controlling my output and get into the chair is going to check each one and pass it through, I may not want the list to know that I'm being babysat by the chair, and it might be okay for me to say, I don't want the forum to know that I'm in that kind of moderation, and that doesn't need to be reported to the forum.
Yeah, fair point.
Okay, Braun.
So many points there. I'm going to reply to that last one. I think that
it's closer to the mic.
I think the person who is moderated should have a right to say, I want this fact to be known to the forum, and then it needs to be told, even if they don't have a right to post there themselves. I think that solves that problem. And otherwise, that's fine. What I actually wanted to comment on was the thing about having a log. That I think that is really important, that every action the moderator team takes should be logged, and ISG can go read it if they're interested. That takes all the workload off. I don't think we should over-engineer that log either. Hopefully there's not too much of this. If there is, then maybe we need to build more powerful tooling, but let's not build a super powerful castle in the sky before we know how many moderation actions we're actually going to need. Because if it's 1 or 2 a week, then anyone can scan it to see if there are working groups in there with a Control F. You don't need to have powerful tooling that tells them.
My expectation is this will be an email from the moderator team to the ISG that the secretariat will basically capture and produce whatever summary the ISG wants from that initially.
Since you're not done with everything, I won't go into all the other stuff, but I think there is a case for having long-lived, consistent roles on here as well as appointed roles, and for time frames that people are on here, so it doesn't become too stuck in one group forever. We'll talk about that later.
Thanks. Andrew.
Yeah, Andrew.
Hi, Andrew Campling. Just one thought on the reporting to the ISG. You might want to differentiate between the sort of informal moderation versus the formal, and where it becomes...
Can you say which you consider formal and informal?
Yeah, I mean, there's some stuff where you might privately, it allows for sort of privately telling someone to tone it down a bit. That doesn't feel like that warrants an immediate notification to the ISG. If you're banning someone from a list for a while, that probably needs more immediate than you looking at the log once a month or something.
Yeah, I mean, one way forward here would be basically to define a bar past which things have to be reported to the ISG, and otherwise leave it up to the ISG whether they want to hear more about other cases. Yeah. Roman.
Hi, Roman Danilio. I want to comment not as the responsible AD, but as an AD, because we're talking about different ISG things. So we had a little discussion on what is the anticipated workload here. As an AD, this doesn't concern me at all. We get a ton of email all the time, so a little bit more to get a heads up to look sounds perfectly kind of reasonable. And to the idea that at some point, maybe the ISG or the responsible AD for a working group gets pulled into that, I just lump this in the bucket as periodically working group chairs already ask for help for additional business, and we don't expect that this would happen a lot. So this would just be another instance of this. So I very much endorse this approach, at least from my perspective of being on the ISG.
Okay, Eric.
So Eric Ving is an AD currently. Basically, what Roman said, we are receiving probably 10 to 20 email a day, erratum, or more. I don't know. Maybe you got more.
Int is 20. Security is 200.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, not really. But what's really important for us is to be filtering it out quickly. So if in the subject of the email, you put the working group, not a working group of mine, nothing urgent, I ignore. Right. Keep it simple, basically.
Right.
And nice ID for the log.
Chris?
Hi, I just wanted to follow up on the point that Pete originally raised on this moderation log and giving that access to the ISG. So it does seem a neat solution to me, but it leads me to think about data retention. So the current IETF list moderation log dates back to 2020. I think that's too long. I value views on how long people think that we should store this data. To me, it feels like 3 years is a reasonable period because you need to sometimes consider what's the history that's gone on. So, yeah, open to hear what people think. Yeah.
Thanks. And let's cap the line after Andrew here, so we can keep moving.
This is the internal log for the moderation team that you're talking about, because obviously if an email gets generated to the ISG, it's in the ISG email archives forever, basically.
Yes. So yeah, you're right. If we send emails to the ISG, that is, I guess, it's the ISG to decide what their data retention policies are. But the if we're maintaining a document and there's read access given to that, it just leaves you to think more about what's the appropriateness of the data that's in there.
I think this might even be part of a larger point that we haven't touched yet, which is sort of how much state should the moderation team take into account past state when they make a decision? Is every decision basically taken only? Is there any history that's being taken into account? There is now, and some people on the list have argued there shouldn't be. but I think that is a too extreme viewpoint. But giving some guidance or setting a policy about here's like the time horizon that the moderator team should look into the past. So you don't look back 20 years, for example, but maybe 3 years or some other period that's TBD. I think that could be a good sort of policy to add.
Ted Lemon. So just one of the things that I think is worth emphasizing here is that moderation actions should not be thought of as punitive, but rather as process sustaining. And from that perspective, unless an action is genuinely punitive, the need to think of it in terms of, you know, reports and, you know, people being offended and stuff like that is less. And so we should make sure that we sort of differentiate between, you know, things that are arguably punitive, like you can't post on the list anymore, versus, you know, things that are just more helpful, like you tend to post a lot, let's moderate your stuff. Or maybe the list itself is a little too active and we think that there's a problem exploding and we should just slow things down a little bit. And those are all kind of different and might have different reporting requirements.
Jay.
Jay Daly, IETF Executive Director. Before my substantive point, I'll just say very quickly to Chris that I'm happy to get legal advice on that, if that would be helpful for you. On the tension between working group chairs and the moderation team, a suggestion or a way around that is to look at the urgency of action and define different actions appropriate for different urgencies, okay? Because that really is the heart of the issue here, is somebody might need to act quickly. And if we can say, right, there are these specific actions that we think are appropriate urgent action and can therefore be taken by the moderation team as well as the working group chairs within that. But then here are others, such as permanently excluding somebody from a list, which are non-urgent, must be taken later and therefore cannot be taken by the moderation team without substantive discussion and whatever. No, I think that might give you a resolution for that.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's worth thinking about.
All right, Eric, real quick.
Yeah, for sure. Eric, still ISG member. When you say reporting to the ISG, you know the story, but maybe not everyone in the room knows. There are two ISG mailing lists, ISG@IETF.org, that includes the liaison, and it's kept forever, and ISG-only, that only includes the ISG, which is rotating every year. So you may be specific in the document.
Good point. Maybe we should say the area directors or something like that instead of ISG. You can send me a PR.
Okay.
All right, we drained the queue. I just want to talk quickly about the bullet at the bottom there. Somebody brought up so the ISG in the past has sort of had content removed from the record of the IETF, and that specifically wanted to call it that is not a moderation action that should be available to the moderators. But this is typically done to eliminate legal risk to the org. And this is something that so the ISG will have other things available to themselves, and so does the LLC. But the moderator team basically cannot sort of have internet drafts yanked, for example, or otherwise affect the record of the IETF. Right, reinstatement. This came up because I think Dan Harkins asked for it to be considered. And so the current draft says that individuals that are under some sort of permanent moderation action can ask for that to be lifted, obviously. The idea is that this is sort of modeled a little bit after the current PR action. You can ask after 1 year, once a year, sort of to have a certain, don't want somebody asking every week. And the request must be made to the entity that took the moderation action, so the chairs or the moderator team. This might be a point for discussion, but we currently say that it is, so if a request is made and is denied, that is not a decision that can be appealed, because otherwise we would basically have an appeals generator here, where somebody asks for reinstatement, they get denied, they appeal that decision, and then we have a yearly or whatever the cadence is appeal going forward, and we wanted to avoid that. I want to call that out because otherwise every decision can be appealed. but we decided that this one cannot, and people might have opinions on that. Right, and also like we're basically saying that the process that we're defining here takes effect with the publication of the RFC. So current moderation actions, specifically PR actions that exist, are not handled under this new proposal, but are handled under the process under which they were established. So for the current PR actions, they get lifted by the process by which PR actions get lifted, i.e. the ISG reconsiders. Do I have a queue? No. Oh, yes. Jinxed it.
Yeah, Jean. Very quickly, the moderation is only for that particular action or for that particular mailing list or that particular channel, correct? Meaning, can a person who's been moderated be banned from accessing an IETF meeting? Just clarifying.
So you mean physically attending an IETF meeting?
Or even remotely?
Remote participation would fall under participation, and I think even physical participation might. We should probably discuss this a little bit. I know we've had cases where legal risks were considered when people try to register for in-person attendance, and there was a discussion on the LLC and maybe sometimes even on the ISG about how we will manage that. It's not clear that the moderator team is necessarily the best venue for this, but it's a fair point. Remote participation, I think it's a participation channel, and so I think that would be I'd be more comfortable with that being under the moderator team's auspices. But in-person participation is, I think, a different.
Okay, so I'm gonna give I'm gonna check again all of the steps that are required for a permanent moderation, but I will be concerned about whether we might be, so in situations where you're saying that there's a legal risk or there's a physical risk, that's obvious, I see no problem. I'm thinking about the possibilities where certain people may end up in permanent moderation because of different reasons, and we basically lose the opportunity to have them around and contribute. I'll check on that and I'll get back to you.
We've had cases where chairs have asked people to leave the room at an in-person working group meeting, right? And I can, that might escalate. So this is moderation because they're not moderating that particular occurrence, right? But basically destroy the standards process or the way we work, right? And so it is needed. I think the question is more like who gets to do that, and is it the moderator team?
Okay, thanks.
Thanks.
John?
John Scudder. So it occurs to me that I think this only, what I'm about to say only matters in situations where the process to permanently moderate someone to begin with is fairly onerous, as with BCP 83. If we still, if we keep having a regime like that where like it's sort of the equivalent of a trial to permanently moderate someone, I think there's potentially value in having a step that we don't currently have of probationary reinstatement, where you don't have to do a full rescindment of the moderation, which is another heavyweight process.
Yeah.
If we've made the process lightweight enough, I don't think that's necessary.
Do you think, so at the moment, I think this would be something we would leave to the moderator team because they get to decide their hammers. Do you think this is a policy issue where we should actually give them a shape to the toolbox that they can define for themselves, or should we just say, consider this?
Yeah, I think that you kind of hinted that maybe what's currently outlined is already lightweight enough that they, can do that. I need to read the document, which, full disclosure, I have not done, and then think about it some more. But I wanted to throw the idea out there.
Thank you.
Andrew.
Hi, Andrew Campling. The text as it's currently worded in terms of sanctions is, in my view, commendably vague and leaves a lot of latitude to the moderation team to decide what's appropriate. So in my view, that would allow them, if they thought it was appropriate, to say you can't come to meetings, either in person or remotely, or that you could be given a probationary return. So there seems to be complete discretion. And I think that's absolutely fine. I mean, if they put someone in the stocks for a week, we might want to review that. But so I think what you've put in there is great.
So I agree. I just wanted to like point out, if somebody believes that we do need to restrict this particular freedom of the moderator team, we need to discuss it and find words that express what's desired.
Can I just then, on the slide though, the other thing I wanted to just query in the text, which is helpfully on this slide, because it explicitly says that these moderation actions don't supersede previous ones, in terms of previous rules apply. I would have thought it'd be just tidier to say.
It doesn't say super. It's basically so all the moderation that happened before this will be published as an RFC are handled under the processes that were in effect when they were taken, and only going forward from publication of this does this new way of reinstatement take effect.
Okay, I just wondered why you didn't want to just obsolete the previous stuff to make it cleaner, but.
We could. I think we discussed it and we landed on this. This is cleaner, but I'm willing to have a discussion.
Okay. David Skenazy. Responding to a previous point about scope, I think it would be useful to be a bit more precise. And what I would recommend is kind of having a split between
the scope on what, sorry?
Sorry, the scope of moderation.
Okay.
Between kind of meetings and everything else. I think right now the draft is pretty clear about, it really sounds like it's about everything else, like mailing lists or IETF GitHub, that's an IETF working group, and so on and so forth. And my reading of the draft was that it wouldn't apply to, let's say, a working group meeting. If Eric said something that a moderator didn't like, the moderator, I don't think, can go up to Eric and say, you need to leave now. And I would recommend that as a split for maybe this document.
So basically leaving the in-person working group meetings only on the chairs.
I think we should have a process for that as well.
We do. It's the chairs.
No, yeah. No, I think it would make sense to have the discussion about involving the moderators for that, perhaps. But I would say this problem is already hard enough. I would maybe separate it and do it like soon after, because I think the IETF needs a process to say this person is not welcome at meetings. Right now, we don't have a very clear one, and having one there to, like, it might make sense to have the moderation team be able to stand up at the mic and say, hey, chair, I want to tell people to cool down because maybe they have more experience than the chairs. But it's a whole other discussion, so I would maybe recommend keeping that out of scope for this draft.
Okay, thanks. But do you think the working group should work on this, or do you?
I absolutely think the working group should work on this. And if we want to put it here, that's fine too. I'm just thinking keeping those, keeping the separate, because I think like the things in person are going to be much more delicate and would probably require different processes, because all of this is, we're going to be really in the weeds about tooling, like, oh, you can moderate this list and here's a process for putting this person in moderation for a week. Whereas in person, it's going to be a lot more shooting from the hip, kind of like, hey, right? So I think the process will end up being different, I think.
Agreed. My strawman proposal would be we leave it as is, i.e. The chairs moderate the working groups, and otherwise it's the ADs and the LLC who are running the show at a physical meeting, in-person meeting, and have them, they already have the flexibility to deal with things. And they are typically the ones that would also hear about things quickest.
So I think I'm totally in agreement with you that, let's say we publish this tomorrow, I would say that. But I think I would be interested in this working group talking about maybe then tackling that second subject.
Okay. Thankfully, we hadn't had too many issues with in-person participation compared to moderation of virtual venues. So
yeah. Queue is getting quite long again, so please keep things brief if we can.
So Eric is a community member now. I think David got a point about a different draft, else we'll be slowing this current draft, right? on this one. Also agree with John, probatory reinstatement. But I came here because I'm really, really uneasy with some taking a non-action that cannot be appealed. The fourth bullet, I don't like it at all. I'm really, really uneasy. And I'm somehow uneasy as well for the last one, but the fourth makes me uneasy, really.
What, do you have an the alternative proposal would be they are appealable then?
Correct.
And we'll just deal with once a year. That's right. Okay.
Yeah, once a year.
As a community member, I see why you say that. As an ISG member, sorry.
It should just go directly to the ISG, obviously. And they can handle the, yeah.
That's right.
So we got Bron.
I was just listening to all this discussion of in-person and wondering how it's enforced. The moderation team member's not going to drag somebody out of the room in person. Somebody's going to have to call the police if it comes to that, and that's going to be the LLC. It's going to be the secretary.
Cases where people were dragged from rooms by other participants.
Yeah, sure, but that you don't need authority to do that. You just need muscles.
Well, it helps if the chairs initiate the action.
Yeah.
I can recall a chair coming down from the podium and actually grabbing the microphone in front of a participant and laying it on the ground. That's an example of
let's maybe put a pin in the in-person one, since I think David made the point that it's not really in scope of this document, and this is a presentation about this document.
I'm sorry, Chris.
So I'm following up on the point that Andrew made, which is about the last bullet point on this slide. I had exactly the same thought, because I'm thinking that if this becomes an RFC, we then going forward, every time there's an issue, we have to be thinking, is this person subject to a PR action prior to 2025, or are they under the new process? And you'll always have that thing to manage. It would seem to be cleaner if we could just have some method of transposing existing actions into whatever the new process is.
Okay, I mean, that would be one way to handle it, basically, that have some statement and document, as I said, with the publication of this document, the ISG agrees that moderation actions, i.e. PR actions, is really what we're talking about, are handled under this new process. That would be a way forward as well. I guess the ISG could give us an indication what they prefer, but yeah.
That would work for me.
Especially if it's easier, if you think it's going to be easier for the moderator team, I think that's valuable input, because that might actually make us want to change that.
Yeah, I think it would be.
Okay.
Pete, have you ever had to, collar somebody, take them out of the room? Yep.
Yeah, physical removal. I got up here to disagree with David, and I think now Lars. I think in-person should be handled exactly the same way as on-list behavior. If someone is being disruptive in the room, the chair should be dealing with that. If the moderator happens to be in the room and notices this misbehavior and thinks the chair isn't doing something, they can sneak up on the side and whisper in John's ear, John, you've got to control that. And if they need to go grab the AD, who should be probably sitting in the room anyway, and say, I don't think that John is doing this moderation of this discussion consistent with our policies, I think it's all the same thing. Taking away the mic is the same as taking away posting privileges or moderating those posting privileges by putting it in a queue. And I don't think it should be different. I think it should feel exactly the same.
Harold.
Harald John. Happening to disagree with Pete. He shouldn't be allowed to duck. Anyway, because most behavior that causes disruption in meetings are violations of standards of behavior. And they happen, they're over. It's not what moderation is about. Let's let the moderation team focus on moderation of communication.
Thank you. Q?
I don't have an opinion on whether in-person conduct should come under this moderation policy, but I think that an action, an action that should be available to the moderation team is restricting participation in forums, be that in person or virtual attendance.
Thanks.
Roman.
Roman Danilio, community member. I wanted to return back to the fifth bullet about how do we handle the past and the present. Honestly, I just pulled up, there are 5 PR actions, so 5 in play over 18 years. I like the idea of a clean cutover to the new way versus the old way. I would ask if we decide to go this way, I think the moderators could handle the five PR actions in their calculus, the old way.
Thank you, Mr. Community Member.
Andrew.
I just bring into the mic the discussion we were sort of having in the chat partly. When I read the draft, I read it through the lens of principally moderating the sort of mailing list behaviors, not behaviors in physical meetings, etc., which in my head I'd sort of thought was more in the territory of the ombuds team, but noting Pete's comments, which I think were to the contrary. Other SDOs have a completely integrated approach to this ombuds team and moderation. It's either RIPE or ICANN. I put ICANN in the list, in the chat. I think possibly it was RIPE. I think if we're expecting the moderator team to cover in-meeting behavior as well, then I think we need to structure it slightly differently and maybe look at that integration. So it's really just, I thought this was principally about mailing list behavior, not how I choose to behave in a working group physical meeting.
We have a section about relationship to the ombuds team, and I can't recall what it says. I think the ombuds team has a liaison to, because the ombuds team, I mean, the IETF has, of course, they find a very complex process around the ombuds team that really, in my opinion, like limits their effectiveness basically, because they are under this draconian privacy that needs to be protected at all costs umbrella, which really restricts their work quite a bit, so that they can't do things that other ombuds teams and other organizations can do, right? But we did want to give the moderators the ability to have somebody from the ombuds team in a way that complies with the rules they're under to share information to them if there's a moderation action that happens to affect somebody who is also been contacted by the ombuds team, let's say. But yeah, so the ombuds team here, and it's difficult to integrate it because of the way it's set up. But also like in person, the ombuds team has no moderation ability because of this privacy protection that they're under. Okay, I get this from Pete.
Jean-François.
Yes, thanks. So a couple of things. I still haven't made up personally my mind about this topic, so I need to think about it a bit better. I'm a little bit concerned as an initial thought that online communications, whether it's video, mail, and so forth, typically kill a lot of personal intentions. And a number of things can be misinterpreted or misunderstood by the 3-4 parties involved. And in occasions, being face-to-face is how you're going to be solving it. So restricting in-person participation because of a moderation, of a permanent moderation online, might not be the best constructive way. So I don't have a full solution. I'm only saying that in occasions, what appears to be a big problem, you just sit in front, have a beer, disappears. And maybe that's the way that you would want to fix those things, to actually have a one-on-one or in-person interaction to just remove all the frictions and all the edges. So I don't know if we're going to be killing that possibility if we go too much on that direction. Second thing, I just realized we're only 36 in this particular session, and I think this is a topic that's going to be affecting a lot the community, and I'm a little bit somehow disappointed there's no more people in the room.
I expect at some point in the future we're going to have a very interesting IETF plenary presentation on this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Even by the chairs.
Oh, what?
Throw me under the bus.
I think I may moderate that decision. Harold, I believe you're up. If you wanted to be up, were you just accidentally in queue, or?
That was a comment I included for the comment on the old actions. the important thing is being clear that after this thing is done, we don't have the process for PR actions anymore. The 5 outstanding cases we can deal with on a case-by-case basis. The important thing is the rules now are the rules now, and the rules that cause us all this trouble are gone.
Yeah, I have one PR open. I'm going to show the open PRs in a little while. That is exactly because we don't actually at the moment like obsolete that old doc. So that's basically the PR that adds this is what we update and this is what we obsolete, which will take that into effect. Pete, I guess.
So yeah, first quickly on Jean-Francois's point, I don't think anybody who thought that in-person goes as a moderation team responsibility thought that a ban instantly meant banned in both in-person and remote. You can construct a moderation that is you can't participate on the list. You can construct a moderation that is you can't participate in person. You can do a mixture of both, or I think those are perfectly open. So I don't think there's any conflict there that makes it more worrisome to moderate in person. I got up because of the comments both in the room, in the chat room and here about the role of the ombuds team. And I think part of this is a misunderstanding of one of the ombuds team's sort of central tenets, which is it's harassment and not just being a jerk that brings you to the ombuds team. And this is something that I think we haven't messaged to the entire community, let alone this group. If someone is being loud and obnoxious and yelling at the mic like a, just one of, people like me, that is disruptive behavior in a working group. That is not harassment. It's not interpersonal. It's not racist. It's not sexual harassment. It's a different kind of behavior that should be dealt with by people who say you're disrupting the working group. You need to stop doing that. When it's harassing, it's stuff that is really outside of that kind of behavior. And that's really talked about quite explicitly in 7776. And it's also why the ombuds team deals with that stuff differently. I've got on my sort of long to-do list to give you a PR about the ombuds team section. I don't have a problem with the ombuds team having a liaison kind of, we're here to give you advice all the time role, because we have that role with the rest of the community. You want to come to us for advice, you're a chair, you need advice, happy to. Having a formal role seems a little weird to me because of all of the confidentiality stuff. And I would hate to see the ombuds team taking a direct role in moderation.
You have a much better understanding of the operational realities of the ombuds team. And if you feel that there's simply no good role here for the ombuds team, that's a fine change to make.
I think there's good informal roles. A formal role, I think, is a little more tricky. But like I said, I owe a PR on this, and I will get one together.
Thank you.
And we are up to Ron.
I just wanted to say, I don't think that we should be optimizing for the case of somebody who has been so badly behaved, they've been banned from a ton of places, to make it possible for them to still participate. Participation is not 100% a right that you can say, well, I haven't been enough of a jerk that you should block me from this bit. The IETF works by people working well together, and if you are so hard to work with that you're skating the edge, it's not a good case for the community to make an effort to include you in the other bits. If you're already blocked in 5 locations, the 6th location can say, we don't want to have you badly behave here too before we block you.
Thanks. Karen?
Yes, I haven't been following this work super closely, but the conversation that implies that working group chairs need to take in any sort of physical action, I find a tiny bit concerning.
Oh, I mean, okay, I am largely joking about this. This is tongue-in-cheek, right? There was an instance where this occurred, and it occurred in a tongue-in-cheek context where The notion though that, you know, the working
If
group
I could-
chairs are able to moderate
could
who is at the
finish.
microphone at a meeting is
Or
really
not,
what
I
I'm.
won't finish, I guess. I just think that we need to be, and it wasn't directed specifically at you. There were several comments that were in that general nature. I can't imagine myself as a working group chair physically intervening if somebody is misbehaving in my group. So I fortunately have never had that, but I think we might need a little bit of, I need to go back and read this and think about it a little bit more, but I do think we need to be a tiny bit careful of what we think we're expecting working group chairs to do, especially if we're trying to encourage new working group chairs. You know, we have this long list of, it's super scary and it might be really hard and these people are going to be very badly behaved. Then you're shocked that you can't get any working group chairs because, you know, that's not the approach I think we want to take.
Yeah, fair point. At the moment, we don't say anything about this, right? And if we were to say something, I mean, I don't think there's any expectation that the chairs themselves need to like take any physical action, right? But the chairs can rely on the LLC, for example, can call in law enforcement if needed, and so on. And if we want to clarify this further, whether in this document or somewhere else, we can. But yes,
I think we need to just be a tiny bit careful. You know, because the nature of the conversation and the suggestions were making me a tiny bit uncomfortable. And I was thinking, if I was a brand new chair, particularly a brand new chair who was possibly on the quieter end of the spectrum or the smaller end of the spectrum, all of that conversation would be slightly off-putting.
Thank you. David.
David Skenazy. I really agree with Karen. And in a way, so I made a point earlier about how like in the room and on the list is kind of different. But Pete made kind of a compelling point that there are analogs, even if like the actions are quite different. Let's say, you know, putting like blocking someone's posting to the list is kind of similar from telling them, you know, taking the microphone away and telling them to sit down. And I think similarly as an analog, on the list, ideally you tell the chair, hey, can you deal with that? But if it's the middle of the night in the chair's time zone, or if the chair is like for some reason not doing it, the moderators need to be able to press the button. And I think to Karen's example, if someone is shouting at the microphone and doesn't want to stop, which kind of happened this week somewhere, and the chairs aren't doing anything, it would make sense to have someone from the moderator team just go up and, like, of course, nothing physical, but say, hey, please sit down. We're taking the microphone away from you. Everyone take a deep breath. So I think, in a way, I still kind of think of my point about maybe splitting it into a different document because the details are being different, but I think I agree fully with Pete that the overall shape of both should eventually be the same.
Thanks. Okay, right, so we have two things, right, that we added. This doesn't list the relationship to the ombudsman because I think that text actually predates adoption, and so I didn't talk about it here specifically, but Pete's going to revise that for us. So the TLDR for the LLC is the LLC will LLC, right? So nothing in this document can take away anything that any duty that the board has to the org, right? So if the LLC sees legal risks and they need to act, they need to act, and this document cannot tell them not to. And the TLDR for the IRTF is that the IRTF is its own org with its own rules, and it points to what they are. If we come up with something that the IRTF believes might work for them, I can see them getting on board here, but it's their decision and not ours. Jay.
Jay Daly again. I have some discomfort with the last point.
Okay.
I don't disagree with it, but there are certain commonalities that have to exist, both conceptually and principally in terms of expectations around behavior and expectations in the way natural justice, the way that people are treated. There are a variety of set of things, and it seems to me, and then also in some of the implementation side of things, it seems to me awkward if we're going to force the issue to have the same conversation twice in two different places to end up at what must therefore be a consistent result if we're to work together. So yeah, so I find that last bit slightly awkward. I mean, just to give you one example, we have on the website something called the IETF, IAB, IRTF privacy statement. Okay, it's a awkward statement, but it covers all of us in that sense. And this is the type of thing where I think perhaps it would be better if we were aiming for something that was similar to that.
I'll let Colin respond, who is walking up to the mic behind you.
Hi, Colin Perkins. This is rapidly not becoming my problem.
Can you eat the mic, Colin?
Can I eat the mic? Yes. So historically, this has been something where the IRTF has had different rules than the IETF. And the whole PR action process and so on is different in the IRTF than it is in the IETF. So I think in terms of recognizing the state of things, then these are clearly different organizations with different rules, although they refer to a whole bunch of policies which are in common. I suspect that is probably still the right thing to do, although I agree for a whole bunch of things we want to do the same thing. So I think what you are saying here is correct. I would be surprised if the IRTF did anything other than pointing to a lot of this and saying, we do the exact same thing. But historically, for example, the mailing list moderation procedures have been different and for good reason. So I think we want that flexibility.
So, Colin, do you think the IRTF would create their own moderator team if they decided to do something like that, or would they say the IETF moderation team also moderates the IRTF lists? Should we try to like basically accommodate the IRTF now in the development of this so that they can get on board with it, or should we do something that feels right for the IETF and only later figure out whether the IRTF is on board?
I think the right thing to do is to do what feels right for the IETF, because the standards process clearly is critical, and making the standards process work is clearly critical. And that has different constraints to running a research organization. For example, the IRTF can be much more trigger happy with the ban button because it's not got the requirements to be open because it's a standards process. So I think the IETF should do what makes sense for the IETF, and the IRTF will then look at it, and if it makes sense for the IRTF, it will adopt it, and if not, it will perhaps adopt some part of it or do something different.
Okay, thanks.
David Skenazy. I think it makes sense for the IRTF to be slightly different, but I think it needs to be a superset. It can't be a weird Venn diagram. So when there was an IRTF document recently about a new IRTF code of conduct, and what I suggested at the time was to say the IRTF it does need its own code of conduct about like research integrity and topics that are not really relevant to the IETF. So it makes sense to have a different document, but to me, it really needs to also say we also follow the IETF guidelines for conduct. If the IETF decides to say, well, calling someone stupid is not okay, I don't think the IRTF should say, no, here it's fine. Not that they would do that, but these organizations are not ships in the night. We share many things. Our entire infrastructure, our mailing lists are tied together in some ways, our tools are tied together. We meet under the same roof. I don't imagine a world where the IETF says you're not allowed to attend meetings, but it's fine, just come here and go to the IRTF ones. That's kind of silly. So I would say what I would recommend for this document would be to have it apply to the IRTF as well. So that would need the document to also be approved by the IRTF, but we can do that. They're not very far. And then if the IRTF wants to have more rules, which they do, like they can the research group chairs can ban more, I think that still works, but I really would like it to be a superset, not separate.
Hi, Jean-François, just to make the point that David just mentioned, what I was just going to say about the contradiction of being stopped from having it in person, but then doesn't apply to the RTF. And so how do we handle that? Thanks.
So in terms of in-person meetings, right, it's not possible to attend an IRTF research group in person without registering for the IETF. So that is already covered, right? So the only divergence would be in the online side.
It's not possible to attend an IRTF research group in person if it is meeting co-located with the IETF.
Yes.
Andrew, sorry.
Hi, yeah, Andrew Campling. On the, just reflecting on the in-person bit, if the expectation is that the moderation team moderates in-person behavior for the reasons Pete sort of elaborated on earlier, that's fine, but that suggests to me that you need sufficient people in the moderation team to be present in every one of the parallel sessions on site in order to moderate that behavior.
Not only the moderator team, it's also still the chairs, and the chairs hopefully are present, right? So, sort of.
That's a
That
stretch.
was the whole. That's the whole. I mean, it's the same argument as for the online participation moderation, right? Because 5 people or 10 people cannot scale to the size of the IETF. We do need the chairs, otherwise.
Well, yeah, I mean, in prima facie, I mean, the chairs are the people who sit up here and say who talks, right? Like, I mean, there's a queue, but we're the people who manage that. And so, I mean, we almost inevitably, chairs will be the first line of defense in this.
Okay.
Do people feel differently? I mean, I don't understand how it could work differently.
Just that then if you're expecting the moderation team to step in when the chair's actions are insufficient, if they're not there, how can they possibly do that?
Hi, Colin Perkins. To respond to David, I think the IRTF Code of Conduct is a prime example of why we can't be a superset of the IETF. Because if you read the IETF Code of Conduct, about 90% of it is about managing the standards process. And all of the things to do with, the things you would expect in a code of conduct, be nice to each other, don't harass people and so on, are either one paragraph at the start or incorporated by reference from other documents. And it really doesn't make sense for the IETF to adopt it because it's all, the vast majority of it is about how you run an effective open standards process. And I think this is the same thing, right? If this makes sense, the IRTF will almost certainly write a very short statement that says the same moderation policies apply. But it needs the flexibility. If this turns out to be something which is tightly optimized to running a standards process, and certainly the PR action process was very optimized to being open and allowing people to continue to participate because of the openness requirements of the standards process, which are not there in a research group. So, I think the IRTF really needs the option to say, look, this doesn't make sense for us. If someone's being a jerk, we can't just say, bye, you lose, because we don't have the requirement to have open participation that a standards process has.
Purely from a not boiling the ocean perspective, I also like to not also take on moderation of the IRTF in this working group as a document editor.
Jay.
Thank you, Jay Daly again. Going back to something Andrew said that just made me think. Andrew said if we expect the moderation team to do something. Now that isn't up until now the way that I have perceived the role of the moderation team here. That for me, this has been a team that is created to manage certain gaps that we have within our current structure, which is urgency, consistency, and skill, shall we say, for doing those things. If I've got that wrong, it'd be good to tease that out. But otherwise, I'm I'm certainly not under the impression that we're saying to them, the moderation team, you have to be doing things. That's not what I sort of am taking it as.
David.
Thanks, David Skenazy again, responding to Colin, responding to me. I think your point makes sense, Colin. Oh, you're over there. Yeah. Your point makes sense, and I think I see what you're saying of a Venn diagram, but I think it would be useful to have like the process you describe of the IRSG, the IRTF in general deciding to come up with rules. I worry about us declaring this out of scope, tossing it over the fence, and then the IRTF saying, oh, we'll get to it eventually. I think it would be really nice to have this document or the work of this group more broadly have like a kernel that is shared between IETF and IRTF that we agree on. And that document would say, and these parts don't apply to the IRTF for these reasons, so that when we land something, we know it works for the IRTF, as opposed to we land it now and then maybe later, or maybe it doesn't work, because we're going to be sharing all the tooling when it comes to if we make improvements to the list, like a report button. We're going to be sharing tooling in MeetEcho, so on and so forth. So I think it would be really nice to, like maybe in parallel, start. I mean, I know it's less of a question for you in a few hours, but I think that would be a great way to run it, because to Lars's point, we don't want to boil the ocean, but we also don't want to design something that doesn't work at all for the IRTF.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense. Certainly there should be people from the IRTF here paying attention. If there's something which seems deeply problematic, clearly that should be brought up. Whether we end up doing the exact same thing, I don't know, but yeah.
I mean, the point that Colin made earlier, let's say the IRTF decides, you've been a jerk, we don't need you anymore. And they basically ban a person from participating in the IRTF. Can that person still attend IETF meetings in person? Because we're under the same roof? Would we make those concessions? Or would we want to have the ability for the IETF to have different rules? Right?
Or more
It's both
likely,
ways.
more likely someone is banned from a mailing, an IRTF list. And you may still want to allow them to participate in the IETF.
And sorry if I can just really quickly jump in. I think that's precisely why it should be the same moderation team for both. Even if maybe the rules are slightly different, because the research group chairs can hit the block button more aggressively, for example. But if someone makes a decision of banning you from the entire thing, there should be a conversation of should we do it from both? And I don't want, like you said, the failure mode of one of them banning here and not the other is silly because we're under the same roof.
Hi, Colin Perkins. I believe, I don't know about the mailing list, I'd have to double check that, but certainly for banning from in-person meetings, there is already a policy in place which says the two organizations will consult. And I'm not sure it's ever been used, but that policy does exist.
Thanks, John, for letting all the queue jumping happen.
Yeah, John, please.
It's just fine. John Scudder. So I just want to repeat something I stuck in the chat, which is whether or not all the talk about, managing this mic in Meet Space in real time is even in charter or not for this group. I would love getting back to talking about mailing list moderation, because it seems like, apart from anything else, we are not prepared to have an organized conversation about bailiffs and, fisticuffs.
Well taken.
So I take this particular article as a positive sign in the sense that we don't have anything urgent. It's more urgent to discuss. So I'm pretty pleased with this whole session so far. Thank you very much. Right. This brings us sort of towards the end and towards open discussion. So these are the open issues, and you noticed. So we started using some labels. So editorial things. So you also might have noticed on Sunday you get an email about what happened in the repository. So I added that silently because I thought it would be useful if anybody feels overwhelmed by that one email a week. Let me know. I'll turn it off. That's agreed. Basically, editorial issues and PRs are not part of that weekly report. And whether something's editorial or not, the editors get to decide. And you can disagree and basically say this label is wrong, but it won't pop up because we felt it was too noisy to have all of the editorial stuff go to the mailing list all the time. So specifically, there's one on whether we should say this memo or this document. If somebody feels very strongly, please comment on this issue. Otherwise, I don't think we need to bother the list with it. But there's some other ones that have labels that say needs PR, which these are ones.
May I clarify that said, doing work in the GitHub is commendable transparency on the part of the authors, but it is not part of the working group. Decisions aren't taken in GitHub for the working group.
Correct. So yes, fair point. I'm sort of explaining the way Elliot and I work sort of for transparency for those of you who are on GitHub. So we tag stuff with needs PR where we think the mailing list discussion and any discussion that's happened on an issue has to sort of solidified enough that we need somebody to propose some text. And this can be either the editors or sometimes it's somebody from the community that writes as a PR. Then on the bottom, there's one that says needs discussion, which is an issue that somebody has raised. And we don't think we haven't seen enough discussion on it to know whether we should take this forward as a text change or not. Yes.
Please finish the issues. I'll go after.
Okay. This is the issues. This is the PRs that we have at the moment, and you can see all of them are in the needs discussion bucket from where we stand. So the summary, some of the summaries are more accurate than others. So sometimes it shifts, and we need to change the title. The bottom one is the one I mentioned earlier, which is the one where we need to say which RFCs do we obsolete and update, and there's a text proposal. Yeah. So if like FYI, this is what we currently have on GitHub.
Jeff, so I think we've reached the point of the agenda where my question is about the scope of what we're actually applying moderation.
Come a bit closer to the mic.
Sorry, is this any better? My question is about the scope of potential other changes. So your top point here about circumventions, like an example of this, the document's Appendix B, talking about what is harassment, that sort of thing. Pete's given us some nice references off to what the current definitions are, what formed the ombuds team. If we have things that are in scope for patterns that are disruptive, but are not actually hitting the line for outright immediate moderation, is that a thing that's in scope for this group to talk about?
Can you give an example of what that might be?
Very specifically, the issue I have is a practice that is called sea-lining. If you check the chat, that will actually have a pointer to a definition for it.
That doesn't help me because I'm standing here and I don't have a device. Could you?
I understand, and actually, I thought I'd save the definitions for.
Okay.
I think the clear answer is yes, that is in scope.
Okay.
It's disruptive, it's in scope.
And that's a very helpful thing to hear. I'm going to read the first paragraph from Wikipedia. The name is in reference to a cartoon. I recommend looking at the entry because it will help explain the context. You will absolutely recognize the behavior. Sea-lining is a type of trolling or harassment that consists of pursuing people with relentless requests for evidence, often tangential or previously addressed, while maintaining a pretense of civility and sincerity and feigning ignorance of the subject matter. So I'm raising this because I actually have had working group participants leave the IETF because they were experiencing patterns of this type of behavior. And in discussions with my other co-chairs, unfortunately, the individuals that were exhibiting these behaviors managed to keep themselves behind the line repeatedly. We've gotten to the point where we will prod the individual and try to divert it over and over again, but it just keeps happening. And it is causing people disengage. This is a problem. And one of the comments I had made in the chat, talking about the sort of thing and overlapping the discussions we're having here, is patterns of behavior are the kinds of things that we should be logging as part of these interactions, even if it's not the outright push the moderation button. How do we sort of start logging a warning level that increases? And it's like eventually this individual is tagged as being problematic, even though we can't just say stop right now. So that's the class of discussion that I would like to see as one of the things, if it's in scope, and if so, this is not going to be an easy thing to address. We don't see this from a large number of individuals, but like every other abusive behavior that we have seen, it's usually a few individuals.
So I agree with Lisa. This is in scope, obviously. And we can certainly have the discussion. I'm going to sit down then and participate from the floor, because I think then the presentation on the document I consider done unless there's any questions on the document. All right. Thank you.
Pete?
To talk about Jeff's comment just a bit. And I've had this conversation in other contexts. I think it is certainly in scope. And I think this comes down to one of the issues that's come up on the mailing list, which is wanting excruciatingly precise rules about when you have crossed the line. And I object to those vehemently for exactly this reason. Because for those of you who've dealt with 8-year-olds or certain engineers we know, stop touching your sister results in, I'm not touching her, I'm not touching her, I'm not touching her. And that's fine, but when I was 8 years old, that resulted in the punishment independent of whether I was in fact touching her. The decision was, you've crossed the line, I just didn't know that line was there until you just demonstrated it to me. And it is perfectly reasonable at that point to say that is disruptive. The continued behavior that you've displayed is disruptive. I couldn't have thought that you would do such a thing until you just did it. And that's a perfectly reasonable thing for a chair to say, you're done. And then we can talk offline after I've decided you're done. We can talk offline about how you can demonstrate that you can participate non-disruptively. And well within scope of chair duties, and exactly why we shouldn't have a list of things that can get you moderated. It's also why I think moderated by putting you in a queue that I have to approve as a chair is what should be first out of the bag. Because I want to be able to say, I'm just going to check your post, and if it looks like sea lioning, I'm not going to post it until you clean it up. And that will be annoying for a while. And if you continue to make me have to read through crap and push back and say, you're not going to post it, then maybe I will pull out the ban tool for a short period of time, whatever it is. So no, I think this is well within scope. This is exactly why we should give discretion to chairs to say, that's disruptive, end of discussion.
Absolutely agreed. It is impossible in these situations to have a bright line standard. It can be very easy to say this is clearly allowable, and it can be very easy to say this is clearly disallowable, but we can't draw a line somewhere in the middle. The line is blurry. Life is blurry. We have to have some discretion for the general goals of the rules, and if we write down strict rules, then there will be inevitable rules lawyering by people in bad faith.
Jeff Haas again. So I'm happy to hear that this is in scope. If this is a helpful discussion and this is what we want to spend time on, I actually have a presentation from 2021 that I gave to the Working Group Chairs Forum that I have on my laptop. I'm willing to take 5 minutes to go through. But the reason to bring it up, I think, is pretty clear. What I think the actionable item is for this document and for IETF process is if we can actually document that this is a thing that we consider disruptive behavior. This at least gives people who, as we sort of seen from several people, this is not a thing that had a clear name for a lot of people. And it's why the concept had become very helpful. People absolutely understand it. Brings the excellent point about 8-year-old behaviors. If we write it down, if we actually have examples of it, and it's considered an unacceptable behavior, it provides a mental tool for chairs, ADs, et cetera, to use as part of their evaluation criteria. And it means that people feel more free to actually squash the behavior when they see it.
Barry.
This is Barry Lima. I agree with Pete and Q that we can't list rules, but I also agree with Jeffrey that this particular item happens often enough and is close enough to the line that we should call it out explicitly.
I mean, from just a process or a document organization perspective, my question is that something we would want to put into Lars and Elliot's document, or is this something the moderation team, as they document their own processes, would want to note?
Thank you for reminding me of something I wanted to say earlier, that I would really like to see this document defer all of that stuff to the team and explicitly say that we don't have an RFC with this stuff in it. It's in a set of guidelines that are managed by the moderation.
As Ganazi said, similar to the discuss criteria or something like that, right? Lisa, did you have something on this?
Yeah, I've been taking notes about specifically things that I believe will be sent to the mod team to decide. The ones I have are the document retention policy. I think the mod team should write down its document retention policy. The appropriate tooling in Mailman or elsewhere, report logging or taking complaints. All of that appropriate tooling, the mod team can figure that out. And things that aren't code of conduct but are helpful guidelines on what is and isn't disruptive behavior, like sea lioning, also mod team ownership.
Lars, so I'm sympathetic to wanting a list of examples of bad behavior, and we tried that in the IETF discussion list BCP, and I think even before that list and after that list, it said these are examples. Other inappropriate posts are definitely possible. And multiple times if people pointed to the list and says, my thing isn't in that list, why did you moderate me? And you can point out 17 times that it says examples above and examples below, but people will still look at the list and try to game it. Right? So if you can solve that problem somehow, maybe we need to put it in 5 places. I think that it could actually be helpful to have this list of behavior that we consider inappropriate, but that might not be universally considered as inappropriate in the IETF. But that was really the problem why we didn't do it so far.
Jeffrey.
Jeff Oz, that was the motivation for asking, is this the scope or not? We have the appendix B in the current document that talks about the patterns. Sea lining is somewhere between a harassing behavior and a disruptive behavior. It sort of has properties of both, but again, the whole point is it stays behind the line. I think a perfectly reasonable thing is this working group says we're not going to deal with this piece of the question and defer to updating some other thing like, a document that the ombuds team ends up using as part of the reference material.
Thank you. Jay. Oh, I'm sorry, did I get that wrong? Yeah, Andrew, please.
Hi, thanks. 2 things. On the blurred line, I put this in the chat. I like the text in the RIPE Code of Conduct, which does say, below are some examples. It's important to be clear that this is a non-exhaustive list. Just because something is not included here does not mean it is acceptable or is not a violation of their code of conduct, and something like that I think is quite helpful. On whether the moderation team should author the document retention policy, which seems quite reasonable. I think we just need to be mindful of things like GDPR. So they might need guidance on what would be appropriate in the policy, so we don't inadvertently do things which are illegal in some places.
Yeah, I suspect Jay might actually have some insight into what our obligations for document retention might be in connection with this, or whatever other point you came here to discuss, please.
Jay Daly again. Yes, I do. We have published policy about that. But one of the concerns I have about leaving all of this to the moderators team is it's not a community-owned thing in the same sort of way as if it goes into a document. And the reason I say that is because we have an increasing need and an increasing effort to educate new participants into the IETF, because the complexity of the IETF has grown over years, and if you didn't grow up through that complexity, you need education to be able to participate. And so We had a new participant program on Sunday for the first time. That's now a whole day session for people to come to learn these things. And there are things in there. There was a session that Bron gives that tells people about things in email and explains to people, you know, that nobody is obliged your email. And if you write a 45-page message, don't be, you know, expect people to read it type thing. So we're already on the edge of things there that are about disruptive behavior or sea lining or these other type of things. So I think, you know, I can see a preference to some of this type of thing being in a more community-owned thing than just within the moderation team, so that they can then feature as part of that education mechanism that we have in new participants.
Matt.
From like what I've heard from other people talking on the mic, like I think that, what if we kind of like, instead of like banning people, because people are like approximations of actions, right? And actions are approximations of effects. What if we like ban the effects instead and maybe like have, like a documentation on like the kind of negative effects that we don't want, and then if we document that, then all the actions that falls through the gap and other stuff can be addressed for, because if certain actions have particular effects on people that people don't want, then those can be like measured through that.
Yeah, a lot of the focus of many of our existing procedures are about asking a conversation to come back on topic and things like that. So you're absolutely right.
Bron?
I was going to say thanks, Jay, for talking about the new participants thing. I think it's certainly worth making sure that includes his what good behavior looks like, roughly. I think enumerating bad behaviors doesn't work. I mean, to that previous point, obviously saying you want to ban the effect of people being punched in the face, but if someone's going around punching people in the face, you don't put up you don't get everyone to wear helmets so their faces are protected. You remove the face puncher.
Also responding to Matt, what you're describing is a set of ideals. I like ideals. These are good. These are goals that we can all work to. But unfortunately, people can be dicks. So at some point, we do need to take action on a person, not a set of ideals.
All right. Any other topics that we have not discussed about the open PRs, or were they? Oh, I already see people making their way to the mics. Bron, I think you're first. Or were you still in? Okay, David, do you have another topic you'd like to steer us to? We have about 15 minutes left, so we still got some time for discussions. And we're going to make a couple hums. So let's say we've got like 10 minutes left, and then we're going to get to some consensus calls.
Great. David Skenazy. Since the queue was empty, I was going to make maybe a meta point, but it sounds like I'm agreeing with what you were about to say, which was, well, first off, this conversation today has been amazing. And how do I say this? I read the list, I follow the list, I emailed the list. That doesn't quite spark joy just as much.
Thank you, Mary Kondo.
And a way that we can thank some things and let them go, since we're going with Mary Kondo, is could we do some hums on the things that we probably agree on to then close them out? Because it's great that we're not even arguing, we're discussing some very important details. But yeah, let's close out the big ticket items, because I think on a lot of those, there's a lot of agreement.
Wonderful. Beautiful tee up. We've heard a lot of great ideas and a lot of real concerns today. Many of those I'm not going to ask for hums on, because many of those, as I said, great ideas that the mod team will want to really chew on and iterate on. We're going to have the opportunity to iterate with a mod team that can update its own policies and decide and be transparent about its policies, but private about its actions. There's a lot of possibility in there to learn and iterate faster than we're currently able to. I'm welcome to suggestions. I welcome suggestions about what we could hum on that should be in scope of our limited charter and our beautifully short and clear document. The one I propose, I'm just going to generally explain it, and then somebody else will come up with better, precise wording, is that we've had a lot of discussion about whether the in-room discussion is in scope consistently with the mailing list discussions. So that would be, I suggest, the first time. Q?
In recognition that we were trying to get to the close of this, something I realized is maybe unclear in the document, or maybe I missed it, is the procedures for appointing and, more importantly, removing people from the moderation team. So it says that they're appointed by the ISG. Who does the ISG take advice from, or no one on that case? And how can someone be removed from the moderation team if someone feels they're no longer fit for the job? And are there term limits, or is it at the IESG's pleasure?
David and Lars speak to that. David, why don't you just let Lars speak to that real quick, and then
Lars Eggert, sorry for jumping. So I think the intent was that they would serve at the discretion of the ISG. So the ISG would also be the removal body. How they get selected, we are pretty mute on, in the sense that so far, for the team that Chris is on, which moderates the IETF discussion list, it's the chair who basically tries to corral people that they think are qualified for that role, right? And my model was at least that we would leave it at that and let the ISG figure out how they want to find qualified people, since they are the shepherds of the standards process. We can obviously stick something in this document that says the ISG should do it this way and that way. I can't really come up with a way why that would be super useful to them, but maybe somebody else can.
I'm willing to accept what you suggested, in which case suggestion, just make that clearer in the document that that's how it's supposed to work.
and has some parity
I've
with
been
how
volunteered to write something.
has some parity with how chairs are selected, working group chairs as well. There, yeah. But David,
Roman, if you're on the same topic, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm on the same topic, not as a responsible AD, but as someone that is on the ISG. Yeah, my mental model on that is not to specify very much more. It was felt very much like working group chairs or designated experts, where there's, and probably more so like designated experts, where we've kind of formally talk about it. It's a group decision on that, to make sure we have the widest field possible, and that also takes input from the community, but in an unspecified way.
David.
Thanks. Since you're asking for topics for potential hums, and please tell me if this is silly, I think taking 17 steps back and looking at these assumptions, like the first one, there should exist a moderation team, and it should be appointed by the ISG, are things that I think all the discussion today has assumed that that's true, but that's not something that's specifically written in our charter. So like those things that are, I think, obvious, confirming those would be kind of helpful to start.
Make it so. All right, we got 39 people on here, seeing 14 so far. Feel free. I know I inevitably get logged out on my phone when I'm sitting here, right? Because I'm logged into it through the phone. It takes me a second to get back on. So please, yes, I should do it better, Barry. I know. I am interested to see someone that has registered no on this, and as is typical in these cases, anyone who feels strongly about that no, I think we'd probably all be interested in hearing from you. Or not, it's fine. There's no obligation.
John, can I?
Yes, Jay, sorry. Yeah, that was great transcription there. I feel strongly about New York City. Anyway, Jay, go on.
Thank you, Jay Daly. I don't actually, well, from what I see, the real issue people have is what power the moderation team has. And if you ask this question without defining what power it has, it's not necessarily going to get the kind of answer that people need. There are some people who wanted an advisory team and some people who wanted, you know, a team that has power to do things. And that seems to be the biggest issue rather than necessarily its existence.
It'd be hard to break that down into noms, but I think it still is useful to kind of get the level sets. That's what David was asking for, I think, is are we broadly like going in the right direction here, right?
How about, can the moderation team moderate lists or ban someone from a list? Like, Jay, does that answer your question about advisory versus enforcement's not a good word, but like, do they have the ability to act?
Working group lists.
Yeah, that's a tough one to phrase right.
No, so Jay just said, I'm going to repeat it. Should the moderation team be only advisory? I think that's a clear one in terms, at least for me.
Yeah, Jeff, so one of the things that I'd suggest in terms of tooling, outright moderation saying you can't post is sometimes way overkill. You know, picking my favorite topic, the right answer that I found outside of IETF when I've done list moderation before is when you recognize a pattern of bad behavior, the person is put basically in the timeout. You know, their requests are put in the moderator queue, and the person who's actually handling the queue, usually the list owner, takes a look at the message that's pending. Have you actually exhibited the behavior you've been told to stop? If not, the message is allowed through. It's a genuine attempt to interact. If you're doing the same thing again, you just simply bounce the message back saying you're doing it again. Please rephrase or alter your behavior.
And we do have a poll running right now. We've got 17 people in. So, Ruth?
Ruth Trevor Ellen, I have another poll suggestion, which is whether in-person should be in scope.
We will definitely do that. Okay, so I am seeing at least two people who are saying that they believe the moderation team should have a solely advisory role. Again, I think the consensus is that it should not be, but we want to invite, once again, people who feel strongly about the yes on that to come forward and talk about it. Jay and Jeff, are you in queue still accidentally, or did you want to? Pete, yes.
I was not a yes, I was a no opinion. And just to express that out loud, I don't think it's necessary for the moderation team to have a non-advisory role. I think that we've done a pretty good job over the years of having people in the positions that could moderate, and the moderation team could take a solely advisory role. I don't have a big giant objection to them taking over the list owners for non-IETF working group lists role. And I'm hesitant about them being too helpful on working group mailing lists. So that's why you got a no opinion out of me.
Okay. So you've got Avri, then Harold.
Hi, yeah, I was one of the no's. And it surprised me because when I went to check it, I wasn't sure, but then I was a no. And part of it is I think there's too many open questions. For me, it's about training. For others, it was about power. I think starting them out, starting the whole idea out in an advisory position, seeing how it unfolds, seeing how the dynamics of it work, and then perhaps making a change to giving them some actual authority to act might be okay. Thanks.
Thank you. Harold.
Harold Alstrand again. if you make something purely advisory, you got to define who they advise. In the case of working group chairs, we have one. In the case of the IETF list moderation team, which is supposed to replace, if we replace it, there's nobody to advise. So if we want this team to actually take over the job of moderating something, it can't be just advisory. Contradiction in terms.
Thank you. Ted?
Ted Lemon. Yeah, so I was a yes, and I just wanted to speak briefly to the yes position, which is that if we don't have the moderator team able to take action, then the window in which action can be taken is very constrained by when the chairs are awake. And for sea lining actions and things like that, immediate action is really required. If it doesn't happen, then the sea lining has succeeded. And so I think that the moderation team has to have at least that much authority.
Oh.
So I said, sorry. Right, so no, it's not only advisory.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I know, and this when we phrased it in the negative this time, that may have been confusing.
Well, I said yes, but I also believe, like actions should be part of like what's considered like taking advice, because giving advice is like giving information, right? And action is a way to kind of like show information. But what the reason I said yes is just like more on like this side of like the spirit of the moderation team, I guess, because like I'm not really familiar with like IETF's like own moderation team, but from my experience joining previous communities from other like platforms or things like that, I've seen communities where the moderation team could become like something that's like doesn't positively benefit the community, but yeah, just have that concern just in case.
Okay, thank you. So how do we want to phrase the in-person?
Maybe
What?
appointed by ISG.
Oh, you want to do input by ISG first? Okay.
I suggested that one. That's a good one.
So. Okay. Should the moderation team be appointed and presumably unappointed in cases where that is warranted by the ISG? Thank you for not suggesting the IETF trust. Okay, that's looking fairly decisive there. Not seeing any no votes. Lots of yeses. Few people who don't care. Okay, let's record that in the annals of our history here. What do you want to do next?
In person, in scope.
So I'm sorry, Colin, did you have a?
Hi, yeah, just on that last one, Colin Pickens, I said no opinion. If this is an IETF specific thing, then absolutely. If it's trying to apply to all of the streams, then not necessarily.
Understood. David.
You were asking how to phrase the next question, and if I can offer a suggestion, would be to scope it to this document, because my opinion is this document should just do the lists, and then maybe a next one could do in person. So maybe say for this draft, should the scope be limited to virtual settings?
How's that? Can, should. No, that's terrible. Terrible. Stop. So I'm doing these things real fast. So should in-person moderation be in the scope of the MODPOD processes document, right? Yeah. Gotta type quick to get like enough of these in, then we can get through some. Don't like that one, Lars?
So I'm wondering, so if this document, which defines the moderation team, then only tasks us with the online side or virtual participation, would it mean that we would have another document that creates some other
Yes,
team, or
that-
would
that
it
is a-
task the team that this document creates with additional duties, or like how do we slice this? I'm gonna vote yes on this, right? But there's some follow-ons that are not clear to me.
Yeah, well, obviously, we're already seeing the room split down the middle on this, perhaps because the phrasing isn't quite right for this. So what do we want to do that's better? Because we do not have a clear consensus on this.
More discussion.
Well, I'm just wondering if there's a different poll we want to
We
try
want to
to here that
ask
we
if the
think.
working group wants to work on this at all, right? So
Okay, that's-
basically, is in-person moderation something the working group wants to take on?
Let's try that. Let's say so. We don't see a clear consensus on that, though we do see, to be clear, like twice as many people who are for it being in scope of this document than the not. So I mean,
I also have an idea for consensus call that might carve out some of the
okay.
disagreement.
What do you want around?
I have been operating under the assumption that we all think that the moderation team can act, but doesn't have to watch and catch everything, that they will be allowed to prioritize where they pay attention and watch and catch a number of things. Is that assumption correct? Rephrase that better.
It is, but the question is, do we want to talk about the scope of the documents versus the agency of the moderation team? And I got the sense we were trying to have the prior discussion about the scope of the documents before we got to that. But Colin?
Hi, Colin.
We're also over time now.
Apologies, I'll be quick. Colin Perkins, it may be that this is a question we wish to revisit later.
I think that it will be the case since we are over time.
For the group, I mean, we solved the mailing list moderation question now and then come back to whether we also solve in person. Don't try and solve everything in one document. Do it piece by piece. Don't let the perfect solution be the enemy of getting the immediate problem solved now.
Well, let's take this overall question back to the list rather than doing hums here. Okay? And with that, I think if there is no other business or comments before this august body, I think we may conclude. Thank you so much for coming.